All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our monthly workshop with the University of Kentucky's Office of Work Life. And our topic today is the fatherhood perspective. And we have three panelists here to discuss this topic with us, and I'm super excited about it. So thank you for joining us.
And thank you, Azada. Thanks so much for having us. It's great. As some of you might have not have heard, Azada and I have worked together on several of these webinars, and this was a great idea that she came up with. And it was funny because when she asked me, she said, David, do you know any fathers that might be interested in having this conversation? And these two gentlemen that I have the honor of sharing with you, and they're going to introduce themselves here in just a second, came to mind immediately because this is what we do. We talk regularly. I meet with these two men every month, and we get to share about life. And I do it, and they bring a lot of life to me. And so I just knew that these are the two guys that I want to share their perspectives with you. So hopefully I haven't set it up to the point to where they feel like I've set the bar too high, but I wanted to start by introducing myself, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. My name is David Weisenhorn. I'm a family scientist here at the university. My role is in Family and Consumer Sciences Extension. I'm a parenting and child development specialist. Most importantly, I'm a dad. I'm a husband of 20 years. I have two children. My oldest is 13. Her name is Eve, and my son, 11, follows suit. And so I share that with you to give you an idea of what my day-to-day is, but also what my parenting responsibilities are. So I'm going to kick it over to Tyrone. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tyrone Atkinson, and I am a program coordinator here for Family Consumer Sciences Extension. Our majority of my work is with youth and families. I am a dad of a 9-year-old, Joshua, 9-year-old boy, only child, and I am married to a wife who also works here at the university. We are going on 15 years married this summer, so glad to be here. Thank you all for your time. Look forward to it.
Conrad, why don't you go ahead and go next, my friend?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm Conrad Davies, and former I taught at the university for 11 years. I've been teaching university studies, different communication studies for 18, but at UK for 11. Just transitioned last year. We started a nonprofit called Be Reconciled. So I'm a founder and executive director of a new nonprofit, podcaster, author, speaker, consultant, all kinds of things that I do. I am been married for 17 years to my wife Candace, and almost 17 years in September. And I've got three world changers is what I call them. My oldest is 13, CJ, he's a junior, Conrad Jr. My middle is 11, he's Levi, and my daughter is 9, and she is Sarah. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Conrad. I like the way that you said life changers, and we're going to get to children are just that. Give you a roadmap. I don't like to take anybody somewhere without telling them where we're going. So just to get an idea of what the intention today is, I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to start here with just what the state of fatherhood is, state of fathers nationally, and then I'm going to bring it to your backyard and talk about just what it is here in Kentucky. The intention is to increase awareness. What's the important roles that we play? Why is that important? What happens when we're not there? And then the last piece of that is just to give further understanding of what the fatherhood perspective is and what is helpful, what's helpful to us, and just sharing a little bit about how we process this thing called fatherhood. And just taking it one step further, what do we know? Where are we in the state of fatherhood? Right now, nationally, there's about 70 million fathers. 35% of those are part of a married couple family, meaning that 65% their families might look a little different. They're maybe a single parented, they may be remarried, or they may not be apart, living currently under the roof, or maybe having a full parenting and role in their child's life. 62% of adult men are fathers. It's interesting, and I think I'll point that I didn't realize that we're beginning to count men at 15 years of age. And so I'll point that out to you, 15 years and older, and that's considered a father, meaning someone who has a child. 16% of those, 16% of fathers are single parents. That leaves 84% of single parenting to mothers. That's a heavy burden. That's a big role. 74 million children in the US, and about 25% of that, 26% of children, 19.7, nearly 20 million children are without their father at home. When you look at that and you bring that into Kentucky, you can see 35% of children live in a single parent family. So again, higher than the national average. That gives you an idea of where we are. And thinking about that, I want to frame the issue because it's important. We're going to talk about fathers because fathers are important, but make no mistake, the importance of fathers does not in any way minimize the importance or the value of mothers. And I think President Obama said it so well, and this was why he was on his campaign trail. So he wasn't president at the moment, but we can say that now what he said was so critical. And this, he says, we need help of all mothers out there who are raising these kids by themselves. The mothers who drop off the child at school, they go to work, they pick them up in the afternoon, they work another shift, they get dinner, they make lunches, they pay the bills, they fix the house, and all the other things it takes both parents to do. So many of these women are doing a heroic job, but they need support. They need another parent. Their child needs another parent. That's what keeps this foundation strong. It's what keeps the foundation of our country strong. I believe that. I believe that. So the reason I share that is because today's topic doesn't minimize in any way the role of a mother. If anything, it wants to I want to magnify it. But we do want to spend time to talk about what's our role. And it's critical because what we know is in the absence of a father. And while we're on the topic, it's important. We talk so much about language now. You'll hear things that people might say fatherlessness. I disagree with the term. It takes a father for a child to even be born through a lot, even if that's artificial. There was a father present. So no child is fatherless. Every child has a father, but they may have an absent father. And so we're calling that father absence. Just again, an FYI, use that as you talk more in your conversations. But the absence of a father has a profound effect, not only on the child, but on society and the family. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. As you can see here, more likely to have behavioral problems when the father's not at home. A child's 2 times more likely to drop out of high school, 2 times more likely to suffer obesity, more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. I think it's clear in this that the father's role oftentimes as the behavioralist, as somebody who defines boundaries, who oftentimes instills a work ethic. Not that a mother can't do those things, but oftentimes those are father's roles. And when that's missed, you'll see the effects of that oftentimes displayed that way. It also affects the family, right? Single parenting. I've many times said to my wife, I couldn't imagine what it would be like if you weren't a part of this equation. Oftentimes the reprieve that she gives me and that I provide her can help us in so many ways. 4 times greater risk of poverty when a father is not at home. There's 2 times greater risk of that child dying as an infant when there's not a father at home. So there's something to be said about provisions and protection here that I want you to kind of resonate with that slide. And then the last one is how it affects the greater community. A child without a father at home is more likely to commit a crime, more likely to go to prison. And if you're a female, they're 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen. You can see financial figures in what I've presented, but the importance of what I'm saying is that there's a major effect, both in the child's life, in the family life, but even in the greater community when fathers don't stand up and do the role. So I'm going to transition now. I'm going to stop this because I want to kind of talk about this, but I'm also wanting to lead us into to hear more about what our panelists say and have a conversation with them. So I'm going to stop the sharing at this point. I'm going to come back on and share some more shortly, but I want you to see the faces of my panelists. So I'm going to stop here. Okay. So gentlemen, Conrad, Tyrone, you just saw some stats. Before we get into a different set of questions, I don't want to change gears so fast, but I thought maybe I would provide some time. Are there responses or things that you want to say just by seeing those stats, hearing those stats? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm going to take just a kind of a historical context to this, where having a faith background, there's sometimes I study the Hebrew language. For those that are Christians, that you may know a little bit about some of the Old Testament context and the literature of the biblical literature. What's interesting, some of the ancient language in Hebrew, the language of Hebrew, it used to be word pictures. It used to, and the word picture or the word for father was Ab, and it was two letters, Aleph and Bet. And the word Aleph used to be drawn like an ox head, which would represent first or strength. And the letter for the letter Aleph was ox head strength, and the letter for the B or Bet was a house. Now, if you put that together, ox head in a tent or a house or a dwelling place, the strength of the house, the strength of the house. And what's interesting about that, when you say Ab, and the Aramaic is Abba, what's interesting about it is that you take away the strength of the house, what happens? And here's this ancient culture of having sort of this written into the script of their language of the strength of the house or the seed planter. Some other ways it could be viewed is the first of the house, the seed planting, the progenitor, the beginning stages. And so when I think about what you were talking about, what I'm hearing from you, David, and these statistics and just the various things that were shared is that take away the strength of the house, take away the first of the house, the if I could use another kind of thing, the house band, the husband house band around the house. There's a lot of things that can get unraveled. If you take away strength, you take away the first, the seed planter, the progenitor, the gardener, you take away the house band. Bear with me just playing with language there. And that's what really marked me as I'm listening to you. And I'm thinking about, wow, take all that away and it affects so much.
So not so surprising in some ways, right? When you think about the context and the historical context of what it is to even be a father, just further defining who we are and what our role is. It doesn't seem surprising that those sorts of effects would take place having the removal of us not being there.
That's right.
Good point. Tyrone, what do you have to say about that? Anything you want to mention?
I thought the way you instructed us to kind of rethink father absence, I thought that was really key and never thought of it that way. The difference in fatherlessness and how that negative connotation sets, especially depending on cultural community, how you view fathers are coming from a context where, seeing different styles of fathers, right? But I like that you kind of rephrase that in that father absence. How do we look at it? But I most importantly, I think I agree with a lot of the things that were stated. We can see that there's evidence when there's not father presence in the home. We can see that there are likely the kids are at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it's interesting you say father style. I'm gonna spur on the conversation. So what was it like? So what was your father like? Thinking about how we've changed. You talked about father style. Just in the past 20 years, the responsibilities of fathers have, is just beyond what I even knew my father to be. I'm 47, growing up in a family of one of 11 children. I had a father who really his role, he was a loving man, but his role was a financial provider. Very little engagement with his children. And I think we would all say that we felt him in his presence, but not much engagement. So much of what we learn and the way in which we behave is based on our experiences. So I'm curious if you would share what was your and you can do a couple of things. You can kind of roll this in. Take what you want and leave what you don't. What was your relationship with your father when you were young? How has that changed over the lifespan of your relationship, your age, over your lifespan? And then were there specific things that your father did that you currently do?
Well, thank you. Great questions. And I think, and I want to be brief to make sure that we have time. I want to say too, just growing up, first of all, as an African-American young man, right? Like we already have a historical context for fathers and just a battle there in our community where those conversations have to take place about the responsibility and roles of a father and how important they are for young Black men, such as myself. I grew up I grew up in Louisville, and I was a child. I have an older brother who's 4 years older than me, and my parents were married. So I was a mama's boy and a father's boy, believe it or not. So I was a daddy's boy. For the majority of my childhood, my dad was a great dad. He always took me with him. Like I was one of those kids that just yearned to be around him. So I loved my dad was a person who worked, but I didn't think about it. We didn't have the term entrepreneur growing up in the 90s, right? So we didn't hear about but my dad he worked a full-time job, but then he also did lawn care. So I cut grass with my dad growing up. And that was a way for me to get shoes and get all the things I wanted, food, whatever it was. I would just go cut grass with him on the weekends. But getting into about 6th grade, going to that adolescent period, going through puberty, my dad started to get into behaviors that negatively impact him and our family. So him and my mom separated in 6th grade. And mind you, my brother's 4 years older, so he's in 10th grade. And those are, if we look, statistically, those are times between the 12 to 18-year-old especially for young men and women, adolescents, those are times when you definitely need some parental guidance as you go through puberty. And that was really where my father was absent because of some of the choices that he made. So really affected me. My parents got divorced when we were in 8th grade. And it just really sent me down a spiral as a young boy, not really having that guidance. And not that there weren't great fathers around. I still had my grandfather who I grew up with, and there were others, but there's nothing like having your dad, right? Even if there are other dads present. So long story short, later on in my college career, came to Lexington for college back in 2002 and been here ever since. But my dad we ended up being able to reconcile. And he kind of came to himself, and we have a great relationship now. So he is healthy and we are in good standing. So that has changed a lot, but I think, I've had a lot of experience understanding what it's like to miss my dad in moments where I felt like I needed him. So now as a dad, and I know you didn't ask this far, but now as a dad, trying to make sure that I'm not missing moments where Joshua needs me. I feel like that's very important. And one of the things I'll let you move on. I think the terms for our dads and their dads, emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, they didn't have that language to deal with. Like now, and where we are in culture now, we have a lot of language, mental health language. We have a lot of ways to explain our emotions. And typically as men, we are taught not to deal with that emotional side, but I think that is a hindrance for us when we are not learning emotional intelligence as kids.
That's great. There's so many things that I heard in what you're saying, and just how it has happened for many of us as fathers, having a father that may not have been the role model. And I don't mean that, but I don't mean that in a negative sense, other than the fact that they could only show us what they had, what they were asked to do, which is not the same what we're being asked to do now. Conrad, when you introduced yourself, you talked about your children being little world changers, and just how. So I want to toss you a different question. What has been the biggest adjustment that you've had with the introduction of your children? And in addition to that, I'm going to have you answer, where do you go when you have parenting questions? To whom do you look to when it comes to fathering questions or parenting questions?
Yeah, great question. So when my children came along, I think it gave me an examination of something that I never thought about in my singleness or even in my early marriage. So in my singleness, I'm thinking about myself. In my early marriage, I'm just thinking about my wife and I. But there's something that happened when, especially my CJ, who's the junior, when he came along, where it opened me up. It opened me up in such a way where I realized that, wow, there's a responsibility and a weight here that I felt didn't I could have consciously and knowingly could have known about it, could have studied it, could have prepared for it, sure, but there's a feeling that really opened me up. And so I really got to a place where a lot of introspection came along. And that introspection messed with me because it was probably the first time in my life I had to face this reality of, man, what kind of father will I be?
Hmm.
Will I pass on my gunk? Will I give this next generation something that I've never dealt with? Can I actually give him something that I don't have? Do I have it? Do I have what it takes? I mean, questions galore arose inside of me. And so to answer the second question, I had a lot of mentors in my life, a lot of men that have come along. And then if you hear from my last comment, there's a faith tradition I hold on to that I had to tune into my faith and just ancient paths of biblical truths and those kind of things, as well as these men help me, has helped me still to this day, help me to say, okay, my son is X, my daughter is Y, my other son is Z. What do you do during this stage, friend, mentor? Um, so it's brought me to a place where I've had to learn it's actually, to answer your question simply, it humbled me when my children came along and it messed with me. To this day, I am still humbled by my children because I
Hmm.
look at it as like sometimes I say to myself, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. There's no manual, there's no way of working this out in a way that if I could just sort of control it and just sort of command and demand away, I would. But some of it, first of all, it's not really my personality, but there's a part of me that says it'd be nice if I can just control it or follow some instructions. And those instructions would be perfect for me to be able to say, okay, step one, do this with CJ. Step two, do this with CJ this way. It'd be so fantastic if I could do that with my CJ, Levi, and Sarah, but I can't. And so it's caused me to be much more humble than I've ever been before in my life. So it's actually lowered me than it's done anything else. So those are hopefully, and so I've looked to men to help me to process that journey.
And it's, I mean, it's a beautiful perspective. How long did it take you to get there? Because
Early.
there's a part of me that still struggles in that understanding how to do that. What do I do?
Hmm.
What how do I respond appropriately in this situation? I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So how does your wife support you in the role as a father?
Yeah. Glad you asked. I've got an amazing wife. She has I think, a very good sensitivity to balance,
Mm,
where it's not just, um, I think beautifully there are things in her context that didn't cause a tension in our marriage, where there was resistance and challenge and certain things that could have come up because of her context. She could have brought it into marriage, and so that really was helpful to allow me to grow and to allow. So her support really was, I needed to grow. I needed to grow up. And her enduring through my immaturities of being a husband or immaturities of just a man, the boy in me, it just gave me space to grow. And then as I've grown these 17 years, 16, 17 years, I'm now walking and doing things in my fathering and my husbandhood that I never imagined because I think she gave space for me to grow. And then I think the other thing too was that I've got some mother wounds in my past, and the shortened story of that is I got to watch my wife mother my children in ways that really, when I observed, it brought healing. And
mm,
so a ways to support was her healing to come into my life because I was able to watch her be used as a vessel to help me to grow, heal, all those different things. And so my marriage was a laboratory for growth and development. And I merged into my fathering better because it started, my marriage was first, and then it led, of course, into my fathering. And so that her support was really, I think, the dynamics of our marriage that took me to the place of me being husband, father, and not just father only. I don't want to be sensitive to any single fathers, but there's this thought of husband was the catalyst into a better father. And I've always had to remember husband is still the laboratory for growing as a better father. And that's been, hopefully my language is not confusing. That's kind of been my journey.
It's beautiful. I mean, first of all, what an amazing thing to be able to say about your wife, sensitivity to balance. That's what I literally wrote that down when you said it. She has had such sensitivity to balance and allowed you space. This is what I heard from you. Like, allowed you space to kind of grow into that fatherhood. In a moment, I'm going to switch us to some research in just how oftentimes that's not the case with fathers, is that they're rarely met with that sensitivity to balance and understanding that that's a balance. So I so appreciate what you said. Tyrone, how would you answer that question if I asked that to you?
I'm glad you asked. I think I love what Conrad said. I'm gonna take a different kind of approach. And I apologize. I didn't, as you great man, I didn't even acknowledge my wife's name when I said I was married. So my wife, Giovanna, but her name is Giovanna and she goes by Vonnie as a nickname. So one of the things that we talk about, we just had a conversation the other night that we always talk about. So one of the things that Vonnie supported me on that I really didn't see as support as a time. And kind of, we kind of went back and forth on this, is Vonnie is very structured. She's very organized. And I am not. You know me, I am the exact opposite. I kind of just wake up and go with whatever's going to be that day and just kind of, yeah, that's just, I'm the opposite of her. And it really, sometimes we butt heads because of it, but actually as it relates to our son, when he was early on, she instituted things that I would have never thought about, like staying on time with bedtime. Joshua to this day, even though he's in third grade, he has to be in bed by a certain time. If he doesn't get, and I know there's, research out there about how much sleep a kid can get, but you'd be amazed how many kids are not sleeping like they need to because of sports and because of other things. And one of the things, even in our friend groups at times, we've gotten kind of made fun of because we have kept him in a kind of a bubble of he needs to stay in this boundary, because if not, we've seen his lack of performance. Right. And you're asking that question about how has she supported me at the time, because I'm very kind of more loose in my parenting, I guess, about those types of things. Cause I'm like, oh, it's 8:15. We can watch this game. He'll be all right. Sometimes I'm the fun dad. Right. And then it's like, well, but once I see, and I had my time, especially in the summer, you can tell when you get off, when kids are out of school and stuff. And I started to see years ago that what she was doing was actually helping him more than it was just being strict. Right. And I think for me, that helped me support to understand, hey, we have to come together. We don't have to parent the same, but we do come together and for the betterment of this child. But I've learned from her in so much of understanding the importance of structure and how much that can do for our babies and big babies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so funny when you were talking, I thought about a conversation that happened in my house last week. My daughter, 13 years old, so she's growing into her own and really beginning to be more boisterous than before. And so she's able to tell us a little bit more about how she feels and doing so a bit more confidently. And she came into the living room. My wife and I were there and we were having a conversation, and she was saying that she shared some news and I just heard it. And I said, oh, I didn't even know that, Eve. And she was like, well, because I don't want to tell you, Dad. And
Right.
And I was like, why wouldn't you want to tell me? And she went on to say, because you would respond this way.
Yep.
And so I tell mom because she responds this way. And I said, isn't that the beauty of having
Yep.
both of us? Like, isn't that the intention? I believe that the reason you tell me certain things is because you know how dad's going to respond. Like, I have to be that response is part of my role as a dad. I'm going to be a protector. I'm going to look at the fallacies in something to make sure that the parameters are safe. Like, what about this? What about this? What about this? Because dad's mind is thinking safety, protection. How do I have that? I'm also the fun person. You know, if she wants to go skating, she's not saying, hey, mom, can we go skateboard? No, she's like, dad, let's go hit the stick. You know, like, let's grab our boards and go. So there are roles that we play, and that's so valuable. And I think about my wife and the way that she supports me is allowing me to be fun, allowing me to do those things, giving me space to say, all right, you're crazy. If that's the way you want to spend your Saturday morning, go do your
Exactly.
Saturday. You know, the kids, wait till dad gets home and then you can do this. She is more like what you had talked about with your wife, is being very structured and going to do the doer, right? I've got this to-do list. I'm going to check these things off.
Right.
And so I appreciate that perspective so much of, like, my wife does allow me to do those things, but there are times, if I'm honest, that I've heard, you shouldn't respond so this way. Maybe you should do this. And I quickly say, but that's why you're important. That's why you're here, because you've got that heart. You've got that ability to say, hey, I want to hear you. I'm going to come compassionately and listen.
Yep.
Conrad, you're shaking your head. You're nodding. Was there something you want to say about that?
No, the beauty of balance. There's
Yeah.
something in balance that I think we're talking about here that, and I also had this thought of, if people only knew how deep we get in this moment, I could see when we're together at the dinner table, how we'd be going real deep in this, but for the sake of recording, but I was just thinking about, the beauty of, I remember this one particular situation, brief story. My wife was rebuking my son for a certain thing, correcting him about a thing he did. He was about 4 years old. And then she says, but I love you. And
Mm.
like, to see that beautiful balance of, you're wrong here, but remember, I love you, that reassurance. But then me on the other side, what it did for me, it challenged me, because for one, personally, because my own personal past, I wept, because I was like, I'd never experienced that, my own mother wounds. But then I went to a place of, it trained me to say, wow, when I am correcting my child, how do I reinforce things? So she became an example as well. Relational, one of my mentors said it this way: your wife can sometimes be a relational manual, where
Mm.
you have a built-in relational manual in your house. And so it made me help me to realize that when I'm in correction mode, how do I reassure, to say, hey, I'm not just leaving you in despair, I just disciplined you, whatever. And so as I'm thinking about what we were just talking about, the nature of our spouses being uh a buffer, a um example, someone different, and we can learn from those differences to grow in our own areas. Though we may not be just like them, but there's still an area of growth for both of us, to be
Mm.
one more firm, one gentler, whatever, and just to have that unity vibe, if I can say it that way.
No, Conrad. I'm sorry if that
It
flashing up there
didn't
stopped.
bother me not one bit. Nope, I'm good.
Because I think what you're saying is important to this study, is very similar to what we're talking about. And I've seen some questions pop up in the chat, and we will touch on those questions. But we'll do that right after this, because I think it's important. What we're talking about is the importance of feeling supported by our spouse, and hopefully there'll be a conversation to come about how we support our spouses. Um, but it's important because there's a lot of disparaging messages that dads get. And I think it's because we're entering into this new behavioral realm of expectation. Again, we've got these expectations right now. So much of the parenting role is slicing and dicing 50-50. There's a lot of equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Inclusion and equity happens not just uh, it happens everywhere. Let's just say that it happens all the place. And right now there's a big need in the home to be equals and to do the parenting as a equal unit. This was a research study that was conducted by the University of Michigan, and they did it in their hospital. And it was a very large study. It was released in 2019, and it was a national poll that they asked dads, what are the disparaging messages that you're receiving, and from whom are you receiving those messages? Just to highlight the point, you can see the disparaging messages: discipline, nutrition and diet, what we're feeding our children, not paying attention, being too rough. And I think that the toughest part, and what I want to allude to and just share with the audience today, is that half of the fathers said that they've been criticized about their parenting choices, and most commonly, person who's criticizing is their spouse, is the parent, is the other parent of the child. Who knows if that's a married couple, and maybe there's more frustration that evolves in those relationships. But the fact that the criticism is coming from the other parent half of the time is really I don't want to say it's disturbing in so many ways, where this is a team unit. This is a unit that we're trying to. It says 2 in 5 parents are criticized respond by seeking out information. But maybe what's even more important is that 1 in 5 say, hey, fine, then I'm going to be less involved. And I think that's oftentimes how it happens a lot of times in the parenting relationship, is that when we receive criticism, when there's criticism, it's oftentimes coming through a point of view, a lens of which we see ourselves in the things that we do well, and we can recognize as a parent, this child needs this. It's so amazing to me how oftentimes my wife and I can experience the same behavior, and both of our attempts to identify what the child needs is different. Not because either one of those are right and wrong. I think they're both right, but it's the way that we're tilted. It's the way that we're created, in the way that we look at problems and we look at what we can offer. I think oftentimes that's the answer, is not so much of what the need of the child is, but what can we offer the child? And that is 2 very different things. That should be different every time if you really want to think of it from that lens. And so thinking about my wife saying, oh, you're too rough with the kids. Oh, Elijah, you work my son up when you guys rough and tumble. And I'm like, well, no, I don't see it that way. What we're doing is connecting in that, right? Like, yeah, I'm rougher than you are. Of course. That's why he's asking to tussle with me, right? My lack of attention isn't due to, it's not because I'm not paying attention. I think what you're saying is that I'm not as responsive, that I'm not as quick to respond. I see it, I'm judging it, but a lot of my slow response is because there's an initial piece that I want to see how he responds or how she responds. They need to get up off the ground. They need to begin to feel that, I'm not going to run to them. So comments or thoughts on this study, this outcome?
Again, for me, this brings me right back to balance. I think when in our own marriage or co-parenting dynamic, when we realize our roles, I think it becomes a beautiful orchestra to where, like, for example, my house dynamics, I like a lot of housework. I mean, I do laundry. I like to do various different things in the house that could be traditional, whatever other, whatever traditional roles may be. I say that because there are certain things that I enjoy doing. And so sometimes that role dynamic sometimes can get skewed because we say, well, this is the standard, but then we have never worked that out in our own marriage and in the same application or principle with parenting. There are certain things in the parenting role, I think, to your point, David, all these examples of certain ways that we view and see from a different perspective, having to really maybe have a conversation as co-parents, as spouses, to say, well, what parts of our children do we see? And to value the other's position. And so I think that's something that I know Candace and I have kind of at times talked through, is that we just see differently, and it's okay to see differently. If I'm driving in a car and she's a passenger, she's going to have an angle of sight that's going to be different than my angle of sight. I am glad that she sees certain things and, hey, Conrad, watch out. And then I slam on the brake. I'm so thankful for that because I didn't see it. Or vice versa with children. Hey, hey, let's back off here. Or, hey, maybe we need to be careful about this, or maybe be careful about that. So I think there's, again, balance and role. in our own relational dynamic, not the universal norms, but to say, can we work that out in our own family as opposed to trying to squeeze ourselves into a norm that can bring frustration and anxieties and other pressures that are beyond what we need.
I love that.
David, if I may,
Yeah, please.
I would say too, I think it's important. One of the things that's helped me, and I think this could be good advice for whether you're married or co-parenting or a single parent. One of the things that helps when you have different perspective, I didn't realize when I came into the day I became a father, I brung all the things that came with me as a son into my fathering. So the way I started to parent Joshua was only by the things that I had experienced in my own personal sonship, if that makes sense. And it took my wife, which is, I'm not saying you have to be married to see this, but it took that perspective of learning just because this is how you were parented doesn't mean it necessarily works for Joshua. Right. And I think for some time that became critical to me. I heard that as a critical, her being critical of the way my style and what I chose to do, but I had to over time, which is why I mentioned earlier about having emotional intelligence and awareness. I had to realize that some of the things, when I hear criticism as a man, I have to assess, do I believe these things because I've already first believed them about myself? Right? Not because someone said them to me. And I think for me, understanding that, hey, there are a lot of things that I come with as a father that were already pre-programmed into me. And are these things healthy? So, more than the right and wrong conversation, but as we look at behaviors in parenting, are these healthy? Am I equipping him with healthy emotions? Am I equipping him with healthy behaviors? And am I being healthy in the home for my child to demonstrate what a father looks like and what he should be like, or what how he should conduct himself in public and in the community. So, but I think that criticism, it is there and it's present. It can be, but I think first we have to deal with self-criticism and understanding ourselves. And are we at a place where we can in a healthy manner parent our children?
That's so, man, it's so well said. And I think it really begs me to want to ask another question, and I will, but I also want to recognize that we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to get to those. For those of you that are listening and you feel like you have something that you want to say, feel free. It's not just about what kind of question do you want to ask us, but even these reflections, like, is there something that I learned today? Hey, thanks for this. I learned this today. Or one thing I'll do different as a result of hearing you is going to be this. If y'all want to drop those things in the chat, or if you just want to unmute yourself, that would be amazing. But Tyrone, what I would ask to follow up on your question is, so I love the fact that you're identifying these are the things this is the checks and balances. Am I being healthy? Is my perspective of parenting and my expectation of my child healthy? And while those are amazing questions, where do you go to find that answer? Or who do you go to find that answer?
I think that's a great question. I think that kind of goes back to what you asked Conrad, in a sense, like, who are the people around me? And I think that sometimes, because for those of us who have another party in our parenting, sometimes we don't want to hear that from them, right? As great as my wife is, sometimes I don't look to her for that that guidance, right? So the great thing for us is we have other couples. I have other men in my life. I have other people that I look up to that I can go and ask for what I would call wisdom, or just to run by things, because I realize, like you said earlier, I think this goes back to that. I have never done this. And I don't know why, as a human, I've come programmed thinking that I needed to be perfect at it, or that I already knew how to do it. But guess what? I've never done it. I've never been a parent of a 9-year-old. And I've never parented on March the 19th, 2024. And I need guidance. I need wisdom every day. And I look to those around me, and especially the two guys I'm talking to on this call, to learn about myself, but also, again, to be more than anything for me, I think being self-aware. I just recently turned 40 a month ago. And I think understanding who I am as a person, but also, man, self-awareness plays so much into how we are as people and how we can just demonstrate life for these little humans that we're responsible for. But it plays a big key for me.
You know, gosh, it's so good because I was asked, like, what's your quote, David? What do you want to do? What's a statement you want to make? And I thought, you know, the best resource for fathers is other fathers, good fathers, people that you look up to. You see their parenting, you're like, I need whatever this guy's got because it seems to work. There's a question in the chat, and I'm going to, Conrad, I know you want to respond to that. And if you want to respond and then maybe see what you can do to answer this question, and we can kick it around. The question says, as a father, I'm aware of the difficulty I have communicating my challenges to my wife, mentors, and others. How do you navigate overcoming the challenges, resistance, and fear associated with articulating the struggles you face?
That's the question I really wanted to get to, tying into what you mentioned, Tyrone. Um, the word that kept coming to mind was courage.
Yeah.
I can so relate to that. And how many times, if my wife were to tell you how many times I came broken in tears, humble, uh, afraid, scared, afraid of her judgment, afraid of other people's judgment, afraid of me doing something wrong, fear of failure. If I could tell you endless stories, I would to encourage you, but it took courage to, and still to this day, it still takes courage to go back and do it again and again and again. And what I've learned, and David, you're talking about a statement, is that I've learned that my children need to play in the playground of my heart. In other words, if they don't play in my playground, they're going to go find some other fathering voice playground to go play in. They're going to learn about life skills through another quote unquote fathering voice, whether it's education, whether it's society, whether it's sports, whether it's coaches, whether it's other mentors. And so I say that is I had to learn to tell my children stories. Now, I didn't tell them all the gross details of what I've gone through and all the challenges, all the details. It's more so showing that I'm human, showing them that I'm human, for one, and showing them that I've got challenges. I have certain resistance and fears. And I've noticed how my kids have responded to that in my context, where they'll even laugh with me about certain bad stories I've had. Like, yeah, remember when Dad did this and this and this, and it becomes like a conversational topic. But what it did for one side, it broke this framework of thinking that I had to have it together. Another side of it too, it gave them something. It's like my dad is really relatable and human, and we can laugh, and he can laugh, and he's okay with his own in his own skin. I think it also helped them to realize that, excuse me, help them to realize that I am to pass on something to them. I am just a part of a generational story that I'm a product of my generation's past. They're products of my wife and then they're going to have their own generation's future. And to realize a bigger story than just I've got it together somehow. You've got to live up to my standards. Like, no, we're all part of this story together. So this idea of navigating and overcoming, I just had to be very courageous. And I've had to open up those stories, and it brought healing and it brought life on both sides. The thing I thought was going to not bring healing because or the very thing I feel like I had to hold back actually was a place of healing because I actually opened that door. And I courageously said to my wife first, mentors first, and then I was able to bring that to my children and say, yeah, Dad had to face challenges too. And it was always hard. It was never an easy challenge. But I can tell you on the other side, it was amazing. It's been amazing. And I still do it to this day. Let me end with this. My children almost every night, they're like, Daddy, I can't go to sleep until two things. You pray over us and you tell us a story. And so they will knock on my door and I'm dead dog tired, ready to like, oh, please let me just let you go night night. You know how to get to bed and go to sleep. But it's like, no, Daddy, I can't go to sleep till you tell me a story and pray over me. I'm like, okay. And so I go in the bed and do the same things. And it dead dog tired. But there's something about it now after thousands of stories, thousands of little 2-minute pieces of my life. They still long for it. They crave for it because it's like, you're the garden I play in, Daddy. Your playground. Tell me another story. I've already heard that one. Give me another one. Give me a new toy to play in. I'm like, okay, let me give you another one. I'm done.
I love it. Man, you know, and so much is so funny because when I read that, I'm like, that is exactly what we do when I meet with these two every month. And it forces, I think, all of us, and it's funny, I say forces us. It's no longer a force feed anymore, but it would force us to talk about the things that are uncomfortable, because that was the point of our meeting. We said, hey man, we want to meet so we can talk about our heart issues. We can talk about the things that are hard to talk about. And so we kind of made a pact, but I appreciate Conrad. It's hard for me every time. I'm a crier, and I don't particularly like to cry, specifically in front of men or anybody for that matter. But I do it a lot, not because I want to do it, but because I've got to, that courageous, right? To respond in spite of fear, in spite of it, not in the absence of it, but in spite of that, I gotta go again. I gotta go a little extra. I gotta push a little harder. Thank you so much for that response, Tyrone. I know you have things you want to say to that, but there's another question I want to kind of kick to you, and that's, how do we talk about, how do we promote the importance of the presence of fathers or the presence of dads among high school students who may not, who are going to be a father, but maybe they don't have one. Again, they might not have one to model much about. How do we do that? How do we promote the importance?
So grateful to be able to answer this question, and I feel like it's right up my alley. Of course, I work with high school and middle school students for the majority of my job, and I think one of the things that I would say, and this is not that I have all the answers, but I think with this generation, if you walk around, even on campus right now, if we were to walk outside and look at everybody, and as we're walking through, what's one thing we're going to see almost with every student is that they're going to have an ear pod or an earbud in, right? And one of the things for the youth right now, the younger generation that I see, is that they are very busy listening to other voices on a daily basis. All they do is listen to stuff. That could be music, it could be a podcast, it could just be whatever it is. They're listening to other voices. And one of the things that I would say and you're talking about the importance of fathering, is to get them to say, hey, have you ever thought about taking time out to hear your own voice? Because what we see with a lot of young people is that because they listen so much to other voices, they don't know what their voice sounds like. And if I don't know who I am as an individual, there's no way that I'm going to be prepared to hear a father when he comes into my life. One of the things, and I would say that as evidence for me, is I have a very hard time. I'm very prideful when it comes to networking and trying to ask for guidance from another man. I, as I was a younger person, especially in college, I knew that there were possible mentors that could mentor me, but because I did not know how to, and honestly, it goes back because I had such a damaged relationship with my own father. I did not know how to seek fathers out because I didn't know what role they played in my life. And I think as we talk about young students or even young men, helping them to understand, hey, sometimes you have to unplug from those voices to hear what's really inside your heart. And I know that may be that's not the scientific area, but I think so many kids are wrapped up in listening to what's going on in the world that they don't have time to evaluate their own emotions. It really, for kids, you only see, especially raising one, a lot of times as young men, all we're taught to do is express ourselves through sports. That's the only avenue that we have. And if a young man does not know how to express himself emotionally, except for when he's on the court or on the field, what happens when he's in the grocery store? What happens when he's in, at school and he came in and he's having a bad day and the teacher said, there's so much. I know we don't have enough time. I can go on for a long time, but I would say encourage them to say, have I found my voice? And if not, can I learn to listen to those give them options to listen to people who are fathers, are healthy people, to give them an alternative to hear different voices than what they're used to. I'll stop there.
I think that's amazing. Great advice. There's a lot of noise, and we have to work as dads, I think, as men, really just to try and quiet a lot of the noise that's happening. I think part of it too is talking more about it. Here we are. Here we are talking about being a dad. Here I am talking about the power of these two men in my life and the realities and the strength that it's brought me. There was a question, and another question that's asking about how can we encourage more fathers to get together among other fathers? Like, are there programs? And I saw Alex drop something in the chat as well. And I want to say, yes, there are. Kentucky KY Academy, KY Dad Academy. It is, if you're not familiar with it, I had it on the screen for a little bit. We'll send out some more. I'll make sure Zeta gets this information out, but the Commonwealth Center for Fathers and Families, CCFF, is an organization that looks just structures on fatherhood and building strong fathers across the state. They run an academy called KY Dad Academy, and it is for Kentucky. It's for fathers across the state. They get together, they learn about parenting programs, they learn about, they get an opportunity to sit in the same room for several nights, and they get to meet each other, they get to hash things out, they get to share, connect. So much of connecting in getting fathers to talk to other fathers is that initial connection. How do we connect? We're all busy, and how do we do that? So know that there are some places. Lexington Fatherhood Initiative is another place that I would say please take a look at. Those are in the chat.